The twin suns of Zerath Prime cast harsh shadows across the crystalline desert as Commander Zephyr adjusted her environmental suit's cooling systems. The Kethmori expedition had been searching for water deposits for 3 rotations now, their homeworld's reservoirs dwindling to critical levels. The drought that plagued their planet showed no signs of ending, and their advanced civilization faced extinction if they couldn't locate new sources soon. "Commander, I'm detecting unusual energy signatures from the canyon ahead," reported Lieutenant Vassara, her blue-scaled hands dancing across the scanner's interface. The Kethmori were an ancient species. Their reptilian features evolved over millennia to survive in arid environments. But even their hardy physiology had limits. Zephyr nodded, her amber eyes reflecting the desert's gleam. "Maintain formation. If there's technology here, it might belong to the hegemony scouts we've been tracking." The hegemony was a ruthless alliance of species that claimed water rights across this sector, often by force. As they crested the canyon's edge, the sight below made them freeze. A sleek vessel, clearly not of hegemony design, lay partially buried in the sand. Smoke trailed from its damaged engines, and the hull bore scorch marks from what appeared to be a recent battle. "Unknown configuration," whispered Sergeant Thanoke, the team's technical specialist. "I've never seen anything like it in our databases." The ship was roughly cylindrical with angular extensions, built from an unfamiliar alloy that seemed to shimmer in the binary sunlight. Strange symbols were etched along its sides, and a transparent section revealed a cramped interior filled with incomprehensible instruments. "Life signs?" Zephyr asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Faint but present. Single occupant, confined to what appears to be the forward section," Vassara reported. "Commander, the energy readings suggest their life support is failing." Zephyr hesitated. Their own water supplies were limited, enough for perhaps 2 more days in this heat. Saving an alien would mean risking their mission, possibly their lives. But the Kethmori Code of Honor was absolute, inherited from their ancestors who had once wandered these same deserts as nomads. "We investigate," she decided, "but maintain caution." Thanoke scanned for weapons. They descended into the canyon using their repulsor packs, the fine sand swirling around them in miniature cyclones. Up close, the alien vessel was even more impressive. The craftsmanship was remarkable, every surface smooth and purposeful, yet the damage was extensive. Blast marks suggested the ship had been in a running battle before crash landing. The airlock was sealed, but Thanoke's tools made quick work of the mechanism. As the portal hissed open, they were struck by the overwhelming heat radiating from within. The ship's environmental controls had clearly failed hours ago. Inside, they found him. The alien was unlike anything in their xenological texts. Bipedal, like the Kethmori, but covered in strange, flexible skin rather than scales. His hair was the color of sand, matted with perspiration, and his clothing was soaked through. He was conscious, but clearly suffering from severe dehydration. When he saw them, his eyes widened with a mixture of hope and wariness. He said something in a language none of them recognized, his voice hoarse and barely audible. "He's dying," Vassara stated simply. "Core temperature is dangerously elevated, and his fluid levels are critical." The alien seemed to understand their intent, if not their words. He pointed weakly to his throat, then made a drinking motion with his hand. The gesture was universal. Zephyr looked at her team, then at her own water reserves. Each of them carried enough for 36 hours of operation. To share with this stranger would reduce their safety margin significantly. "Commander," Fene said quietly, "we don't know anything about this species. He could be a spy, a criminal, even a bioweapon." But Zephyr was already unsealing her emergency water container. In Kethmori culture, to deny water to any living being was the gravest sin. Their ancestors had survived the great deserts by helping one another, sharing their most precious resource with friend and stranger alike. She knelt beside the alien and offered the container. His eyes filled with what she assumed was gratitude as he accepted it with trembling hands. He drank carefully, rationing the precious liquid despite his obvious thirst. "Thank you," he whispered in accented but recognizable galactic standard. "I am Captain Marcus Chun of the Terran Colonial Fleet." The words hit them like a shockwave. Terran, human, the species that had appeared in the galactic community barely a century ago, spreading across space with unprecedented speed and determination. They were known for their technological adaptability and fierce independence, but also for their unpredictable nature. "You speak our language?" Zephyr asked. Marcus managed a weak smile. "I'm a translator by training. Your ship's communications. I've been monitoring them. Keth Mori, from the Zayrath system, searching for water sources." His expression grew serious. "I know about your drought." "Ow!" Vasera demanded, her hand moving instinctively to her weapon. "Because I was sent to help," Marcus replied, struggling to sit up. "My government received your distress signals 3 months ago. I'm part of an advanced scout team, surveying potential assistance options." The revelation stunned them. The Keth Mori had sent those signals to anyone who might listen, but they never expected a response, certainly not from the enigmatic humans who seemed to prefer dealing with larger, more powerful civilizations. "Your ship," Fenoke asked, "attacked by hegemony forces 2 days out from your system. They don't want anyone interfering with their territorial claims." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I managed to disable their tracking, but my engines took heavy damage. Been gliding on momentum ever since." Zephyr made a decision that would echo through history. She turned to her team. "We evacuate him to our ship." "Fenoke, can you salvage anything useful from his vessel?" "Commander, this could be a trap," Vasera warned. "Then it's a very elaborate one." Zephyr helped Marcus to his feet, surprised by how similar his weight and balance were to her own species. Besides, he chose to reveal information he could have kept secret. That suggests honesty. As they prepared to leave, Marcus insisted on retrieving a sealed case from his ship's cargo hold. "Critical data," he explained. "Without this, my mission fails anyway." The return journey to their ship was arduous. Marcus, despite his weakened state, proved surprisingly resilient, adapting quickly to the alien environment suit they provided. He asked intelligent questions about their equipment and procedures, displaying the curiosity that seemed characteristic of his species. Aboard the Keth Mori vessel, ship's medic healer Yathnam examined their unexpected passenger. "Fascinating," she murmured, her scanner revealing biological details. "His cellular structure is remarkably similar to ours, but his adaptation mechanisms are extraordinary. This species could potentially survive in environments that would kill most others." Marcus, now properly hydrated and cooled, was far more alert. He sat in their small medical bay, studying his rescuers with obvious interest. "Your generosity saved my life," he said formally. "By human custom, this creates a debt that must be repaid." "No debt exists," Zephyr replied. "What we did was simple decency. Perhaps to you. But humans take our obligations seriously." Marcus opened his sealed case, revealing complex data storage devices. This contains detailed surveys of over 40 solar systems, including 15 with abundant water worlds currently unclaimed by any galactic power. The bridge fell silent. Vasera leaned forward. "You're offering us territorial information?" "I'm offering partnership," Marcus corrected. "Humans are good at finding things, resources, solutions, opportunities. Keth Mori are known for their engineering skills and environmental adaptation techniques. Together, we could establish colonies that benefit both our peoples." Fenoke studied the data displays with growing excitement. These world classifications are incredibly detailed. Some of these planets could support massive terraforming operations. "The closest viable system is only 6 weeks away," Marcus continued. "Ocean world, minimal native life, perfect for establishing extraction and purification facilities. The hegemony doesn't even know it exists." Commander Zephyr felt a stirring of hope she hadn't experienced in months. "Why would your people help us? What do humans gain?" Marcus smiled, and she was struck by how the expression transformed his features. "Humans believe that kindness should be repaid with kindness, and practical solutions benefit everyone. Your people shared water when I needed it most. Now I'll help you find all the water your civilization requires." Over the next several hours, as they studied Marcus's data and planned their next moves, Zephyr began to understand what made humans unique in the galaxy. They weren't the strongest species, nor the most advanced technologically, but they possessed something rarer, the ability to see connections and possibilities that others missed, combined with an almost reckless generosity toward those who had shown them friendship. "There's something else," Marcus said as they prepared to depart for the coordinates he'd provided. "Humans have been developing new water purification and atmospheric processing technologies. We'd like to share them with the Keth Mori. In exchange for what? Vasera asked suspiciously. Friendship, Marcus replied simply. And maybe some lessons in desert survival. Humans are still learning how to thrive in harsh environments. Your people have mastered it over millions of years. As their ship broke orbit, heading toward a future that seemed suddenly bright with possibility, Zephyr reflected on the strange turn of events. A simple act of compassion had opened doors to salvation for her entire species. She didn't yet know that this was just the beginning, or that the human concept of repaying kindness would reshape the balance of power in their entire sector of the galaxy. For now, it was enough that they were no longer alone in their struggle, and that somewhere among the stars, water worlds waited to welcome the children of Zerath Prime. The vast emptiness of space stretched before them, no longer hostile, but filled with promise and the dawning of an unprecedented alliance between two species who understood the true value of life's most precious gifts. The ocean world, designated as Kepler 442c, hung in space like a blue jewel, its surface glistening with endless seas that reflected the light of its orange dwarf star. Commander Zephyr stood on the bridge of the joint Keth Mori human exploration vessel, watching the planet grow larger on their approach. 6 weeks had passed since their encounter with Marcus Chun, and those weeks had fundamentally changed everything she thought she knew about interstellar cooperation. Atmospheric composition confirmed, reported Dr. Sarah Martinez, the human atmospheric specialist who had joined their mission. Oxygen-nitrogen mix, slightly higher humidity than Earth standard, but well within tolerance for both our species. Marcus, now fully recovered and serving as liaison between the two crews, studied the sensor readings with satisfaction. Preliminary scans show no intelligent life, minimal fauna, mostly marine ecosystems. Perfect for establishing extraction facilities without ecological disruption. The integration of human and Keth Mori crews had been surprisingly smooth. Where Zephyr had expected cultural clashes, she instead found fascinating parallels. Both species valued honor, ingenuity, and persistence. The humans brought technological innovations and resource-finding expertise, while the Keth Mori contributed environmental engineering skills honed by millennia of desert survival. Commander Vasera called from the sensor station. We're detecting artificial structures on the planet's surface. The bridge fell silent. Marcus frowned at his displays. That's impossible. Our surveys showed no signs of civilization. It's not civilization, Thanoke said grimly, his scaled features hardening. It's hegemony infrastructure. Automated mining platforms, newly constructed. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. The hegemony had somehow discovered this world and claimed it while they'd been in transit. Worse, the platforms were already operational, massive extraction rigs pulling water directly from the oceans and loading it into transport vessels. How many ships? Zephyr asked, though she dreaded the answer. 12 cargo haulers for escort frigates, and Vasera paused, checking her readings twice. 1 dreadnought, the Bloodfang. Even Marcus went pale. The Bloodfang was legendary throughout the sector, a massive warship commanded by Admiral Karath, who had built his reputation destroying any resistance to hegemony expansion. No single ship could stand against it. We should leave, Healer Yathnam said quietly. Report back to our respective governments. Request proper military support. By the time we return with help, they'll have stripped this world clean, Marcus replied, his jaw set in the determined expression Zephyr had learned to recognize. And they'll have moved on to claim other systems from my survey data. You think they tortured the information from captured crew members? Vasera asked. I know they did. Marcus pulled up a communication intercept. I've been monitoring their transmissions. They have the complete survey data, all 40 systems. They're planning to claim everything before either of our governments can respond. The strategic implications were staggering. With control over that many water-rich worlds, the hegemony could monopolize the sector's most vital resource, holding entire civilizations hostage to their demands. There has to be something we can do, Dr. Martinez said, studying the tactical display. Some way to disrupt their operations. Thanoke highlighted the mining platforms on the main screen. Those extractors are automated, controlled by a central processing station on the planet's largest island. If we could disable that, with what? Bosara Damanda. We're one ship against a fleet. Even if we could somehow reach the surface, we'd never get back off. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the data with the intensity Zephyr had learned meant he was formulating one of his species' famously audacious plans. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute conviction. "We don't need to get back off." "Explain," Zephyr ordered. "The hegemony's greatest weakness is their arrogance. They assume no one would be foolish enough to challenge them directly. But humans have a saying, sometimes the best defense is a completely insane offense." He pulled up detailed schematics of the mining operation. Those platforms are incredibly sophisticated, but they're also incredibly vulnerable. They're designed to process massive volumes of water quickly, which means their containment systems operate under enormous pressure. Dr. Martinez caught on immediately. "You're talking about overloading the pressure systems." "Exactly. If we could introduce a catalytic agent into their processing stream, something that would cause rapid expansion and pressure buildup, the entire operation would explode." Thenoke finished, his eyes bright with understanding. "But how do we deliver such an agent past their defenses?" Marcus smiled, and Zephyr felt a familiar mixture of admiration and terror at that expression. "We surrender." The plan was ambitious to the point of madness. They would approach the hegemony fleet under a flag of truce, claiming to be offering intelligence about human military capabilities in exchange for safe passage. Once aboard the command ship, a small team would infiltrate the mining control systems while the main group provided distraction. "The catalytic compound can be synthesized from materials in our medical bay," Dr. Martinez explained. Keth-Mori stress hormones combined with human adrenaline derivatives create a highly unstable reaction when exposed to the specific mineral content of this world's ocean water. "How unstable?" Healer Yathnam asked nervously. "Think small supernovae," Marcus replied cheerfully. The approach phase was the longest hour of Zephyr life. Every sensor sweep from the hegemony ships felt like a weapon lock, every communication exchange like walking through a minefield. Admiral Karath himself appeared on their view screen, his scarred reptilian features radiating the casual cruelty that had made him infamous. "Surrender accepted," he said in accented galactic standard. "You'll transport aboard immediately for interrogation. Any attempt at deception will result in the destruction of your vessel and crew." "Understood," Zephyr replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We're transmitting our prisoner manifest now." The manifest was carefully crafted fiction, listing Marcus and Dr. Martinez as captured human intelligence officers while describing the Keth-Mori crew as refugees seeking asylum. It was just plausible enough to explain their presence while providing cover for their real mission. The transporter beam deposited them in the Bloodfang's cavernous detention bay, surrounded by heavily armed guards. Admiral Karath studied them with predatory interest, his gaze lingering on Marcus with particular intensity. "So, the famous human adaptability. You don't look particularly impressive." Karatha's translator rendered his words with mechanical precision, stripping away any emotional nuance. "We try not to," Marcus replied evenly. "It helps people underestimate us." The comment earned him a vicious backhand that sent him sprawling. Zephyr forced herself not to react, knowing that any sign of cooperation would doom their plan. "Take the humans to interrogation room 7, Karath ordered. "Use the neural extractors. I want everything they know about human military capabilities and resource locations." As the guards dragged Marcus and Dr. Martinez away, Karath turned his attention to the Keth-Mori. "As for you desert rats, you'll be processed as indentured laborers. Your species has useful environmental adaptation traits." It was exactly what they'd hoped for. While the humans underwent interrogation, the Keth-Mori would be taken to the ship's work sections, passing directly through the areas that housed the mining control systems. The next several hours tested every aspect of their planning and coordination. Thenoke used his technical expertise to identify the central control nodes, while Vasera maintained surveillance for patrol routes. Healer Yathnam, her medical knowledge proving invaluable, helped prepare the catalytic compound using improvised materials from the ship's medical bay. Meanwhile, Marcus and Dr. Martinez endured their interrogation with remarkable stoicism. The neural extractors were designed to cause maximum pain while extracting information, but humans, it turned out, had an extraordinary tolerance for psychological torture. They fed their captors carefully selected false data, mixed with just enough truth to maintain credibility. "Fascinating," Admiral Karath mused as he reviewed the preliminary reports. "Human pain responses are significantly different from any species we've encountered. They actually seemed to become more determined under torture rather than less. The observation was more accurate than he knew. Human psychology, evolved through millennia of surviving in hostile environments, had developed remarkable resilience mechanisms. Where other species broke under pressure, humans often found reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. At precisely 0347 ship time, when the guard rotation left a brief gap in surveillance, thought-provoking slipped into the mining control center. The hegemony's technology was advanced, but predictable, their security protocols following standard patterns he'd studied extensively. The catalytic compound went into the processing stream control systems like digital poison, its parameters disguised as routine efficiency upgrades. Within minutes, it would begin affecting every extraction platform on the planet's surface. But, as thought-provoking prepared to leave, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Intruders detected in Section C7, the ship's computer announced in its emotionless voice. All security teams respond immediately. Their cover was blown. What followed was a desperate fighting retreat through the ship's corridors. The Keth Mori, despite their peaceful nature, proved surprisingly effective in close combat. Their desert survival instincts translated well to shipboard warfare, their ability to move silently through cramped spaces giving them crucial advantages. But they were outnumbered 50-1, and the ship's internal defenses were tracking their every movement. Exit strategy? Vassera asked as they barricaded themselves in a maintenance section. Working on it, Marcus replied over the comm system. He and Dr. Martinez had somehow escaped their interrogation cells during the confusion, but they were trapped 3 decks away with no clear path to reunion. That was when the explosions began. The mining platforms on the planet's surface were detonating in sequence, each one a brilliant flash visible even from orbit. The pressure overloads were cascading through the entire extraction network exactly as planned, but the effects were far more spectacular than anyone had anticipated. "What did you do?" Admiral Karatha's voice echoed through the ship's communication system, no longer controlled but filled with rage. Marcus's response came from the bridge speakers, somehow having gained access to the ship's main communication array. "We gave you exactly what humans always give bullies, Admiral. A demonstration of why it's better to be our friends than our enemies." The final platform explosion was visible as a brief second sun on the planet's surface, its shockwave rippling across the oceans in vast concentric circles. In the space of an hour, the hegemony's entire operation had been reduced to twisted metal and empty dreams. But they were still trapped aboard an enemy dreadnought, facing an admiral whose reputation for cruelty had just been thoroughly challenged by a handful of refugees and explorers. The real test of the human-Keth-Mori alliance was just beginning. The Bloodfang shuddered as Admiral Karatha's fury translated into action. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the ship, sealing every section as security teams swept the corridors with methodical brutality. The dreadnought's weapons systems powered up, targeting the destroyed mining platforms below, as if the Admiral could somehow punish the ocean itself for defying him. Commander Zephyr pressed herself against the maintenance tunnel's wall as heavy footsteps thundered past. 3 decks away, Marcus Chen's voice continued to echo from the ship's communication system, somehow maintaining access despite the hegemony's frantic attempts to cut him off. "Admiral Karath," Marcus said, his tone conversational despite their desperate circumstances, "I'm curious about something. How many worlds has the hegemony conquered through fear?" Silence. Karatha's roar reverberated through the ship's superstructure. "Find them. Bring me their heads." But Marcus continued speaking, his words carrying to every corner of the massive vessel. "Because here's what I've learned about fear as a governing principle. It only works until someone stops being afraid." thought-provoking monitored his scanner, tracking the security team's movements. "They're using systematic grid searches," he whispered. "Professional, efficient. We have perhaps 20 minutes before they find us." "Marcus is buying us time," Vassera observed. "But for what? Our ship is disabled, and we're trapped aboard a dreadnought with a crew of 5,000. Healer Yathnam was examining something she'd discovered in her medical scanner readings. "Commander, I'm detecting unusual biometric signatures from the ship's lower decks. Life signs that don't match hegemony species profiles." Zephyr studied the data, her tactical training immediately recognizing the implications. "Prisoners. Labor conscripts." She felt a surge of anger. They're using slave labor to run this ship. The revelation added a new dimension to their situation. The hegemony's practice of forced conscription was known, but rarely discussed in diplomatic circles. Most civilizations prefer to ignore the uncomfortable truth that their treaties and trade agreements were built on the suffering of countless unnamed individuals. If we could reach the labor decks, thought-provoking suggested, coordinate with the prisoners. A shipboard uprising? Vasera shook her head. Too dangerous. Most conscripts are broken spirits, too afraid to resist even if opportunity presented itself. But Zephyr was thinking of Marcus's words about fear and the moment when people stopped being afraid. Not if they believed freedom was actually possible. Meanwhile, on the bridge, Marcus had gained physical access to the ship's primary control systems through a maintenance shaft Dr. Martinez had identified from her study of hegemony ship designs. The human talent for technological adaptation was serving them well, their ability to understand and manipulate alien systems proving remarkably sophisticated. You know what's interesting about humans, Admiral? Marcus said as he worked, his hands flying across control interfaces while avoiding security sweeps. We have this concept called leverage. Not the mechanical kind, though we're good at that too, but the strategic kind. Admiral Karoff had stopped responding directly, but Marcus could sense the growing desperation in the ship's defensive posture. The hegemony was discovering what many other species had learned. Humans were extraordinarily difficult to pin down when they didn't want to be caught. Dr. Martinez slipped through a ventilation grate into the ship's data core, her smaller stature allowing access to areas the larger hegemony crew couldn't reach. Marcus, I'm seeing communication logs here that you need to review. What kind of logs? Prisoner manifests, forced conscription records, slave labor assignments. Her voice grew tight with controlled anger. There are over 3,000 individuals from 40 different species being held on this ship alone. The scope of the hegemony's operation was staggering. They weren't just claiming water rights. They were systematically enslaving entire populations to support their expansion. The mining operation on Kepler 442c had been staffed entirely by conscripted labor from dozens of conquered worlds. Send those records to the ship's general communication system, Marcus ordered. Every screen, every speaker, every data terminal. Within minutes, the truth was flooding through the Bloodfang's information networks. Conscripts who had never known the full extent of their fellow prisoners' suffering suddenly saw the massive scope of the hegemony's crimes. Security personnel discovered that their own recruiting operations had devastated civilizations they'd never heard of. But more importantly, the records revealed something the hegemony had worked desperately to hide: exact locations of their forced labor camps, the identities of collaborator governments, and detailed financial records showing which legitimate corporations were knowingly purchasing slave-produced goods. You're making this worse for yourselves, Admiral Karoff finally spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. Even if you escape this ship, the hegemony will hunt you across the galaxy. Your species, your planets, everything you've ever cared about will burn. Marcus's response came with absolute calm. Admiral, you're thinking like someone who's always been the biggest predator in the ecosystem. But humans evolved as persistence hunters. We don't need to be stronger or faster than our prey. We just need to be more determined. The psychological warfare was having its intended effect. Throughout the ship, crews were beginning to question orders. Conscripts were whispering in hidden corners, and security teams were moving with less certainty. The hegemony's greatest strength, the absolute authority that came from instilling terror, was being systematically undermined. In the maintenance tunnel, Zephyr made a decision that would define the rest of the conflict. We're going to the labor decks, she announced. Thought-provoking, can you access the ship's internal transport system? Risky, he replied, but possible. The security lockdowns are focused on the upper decks where they think we're hiding. Vasera, you'll coordinate with any prisoners who show potential for organized resistance. Healer Yathnam, you'll handle medical triage for anyone who's been injured or tortured. And you, Commander? Vasera asked. I'm going to have a conversation with whoever's in charge of the conscript operations. There are certain things that need to be said. The journey to the ship's lower decks revealed the full horror of the hegemony system. Cramped quarters housed dozens of individuals in spaces designed for 5. The air recycling was minimal, creating a constant atmosphere of staleness and despair. Worse were the control mechanisms. neural collars that could deliver incapacitating pain at the touch of a button, held by overseers who seemed to take sadistic pleasure in their work. But as Zephyr and her team moved through the labor areas, they discovered something unexpected. The conscripts weren't broken spirits. They were survivors, individuals who had endured unimaginable hardship while maintaining their core identity and dignity. The hegemony had taken their freedom, but not their essential selves. "You're not hegemony," observed a tall, gaunt figure with distinctive cranial ridges marking him as Altarian. His neural collar flickered with threatening energy, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. "Keth Mori," Zephyr replied simply. "And we're here to discuss alternative arrangements." Word spread through the labor decks with surprising speed. Within an hour, Zephyr found herself addressing an informal gathering of conscripts representing dozens of species and skill sets. Their diversity was remarkable. Engineers, scientists, artists, warriors, farmers, teachers, individuals whose talents had been perverted into serving the hegemony's expansion. "We can't promise safety," she told them honestly. "We can't promise success. But we can promise that if you help us take this ship, every communication log, every record, every piece of evidence of what the hegemony has done will be transmitted to every government in the sector." "And after?" asked a young Zephyrian whose scales still bore the scars of energy weapon burns. "What happens to us when this is over?" The question struck to the heart of their situation. Even if they succeeded, what future awaited these individuals? Their homeworlds might be destroyed, their families might be dead, their entire civilizations might have been scattered or enslaved. "Then, you'll be free to choose," Zephyr replied. "Free to rebuild, to find new homes, to create new lives. The Keth Mori and humans will help however we can." It was a simple promise, but it carried weight because it came from someone who had already demonstrated her willingness to risk everything for strangers. The conscripts had learned to recognize sincerity through their suffering, and they recognized it now. "The Overseer's control room is on Deck 15, the Altarian said quietly. 37 guards, all armed with neural disruptors. The main control system for our collars is there. Ship's armory is on Deck 12, added another voice. Heavy security, but if we could reach it. The planning that followed was unlike anything Zephyr had experienced. Instead of military hierarchy and formal protocols, it was organic, collaborative, drawing on the diverse skills and knowledge of dozens of species. Engineers explained vulnerable points in the ship's systems, while former soldiers outlined tactical approaches. Artists and teachers contributed insights in psychological warfare and crowd coordination. Most importantly, they had something the hegemony couldn't anticipate: absolute unity of purpose. Every individual in that room had suffered under the same system, had watched friends die, had endured humiliations and tortures designed to break their spirits. Now, they had a chance to strike back. But as they finalized their plans, new alarms began sounding throughout the ship. "Attention, all decks," Admiral Karatha's voice announced with ominous satisfaction. "We have received reinforcements. 2 additional dreadnoughts and a full battle group are entering the system. Our uninvited guests will surrender immediately, or we will begin executing prisoners at a rate of 1 per minute until they comply." The revelation changed everything. They weren't just facing one ship anymore, but an entire fleet. Even if they managed to take the Bloodfang, they would still be outnumbered and outgunned by overwhelming odds. But as Zephyr looked around the room at the faces of the conscripts, she saw something that gave her hope. They weren't afraid anymore. After everything they'd endured, the threat of execution seemed almost mundane compared to the possibility of genuine freedom. "Well," said the young Zephyrian with a grim smile, "we always knew this was going to be interesting." And somewhere in the ship's data core, Dr. Martinez discovered files that would change not just the battle, but the entire balance of power in their sector of the galaxy. The files Dr. Martinez discovered in the Bloodfang's data core contained information that went far beyond simple prisoner records. Hidden in the ship's classified archives were detailed intelligence reports, financial documents, and communication logs that revealed the true scope of the hegemony's operations throughout the sector. "Marcus, you need to see this," she transmitted through their improvised communication network. "The hegemony isn't just claiming water rights. They're systematically destabilizing entire regions to create refugee populations they can conscript." Marcus paused in his sabotage of the ship's defensive systems, processing the implications. Engineered conflicts? Worse, they're triggering environmental disasters, supporting dictatorial regimes, even introducing diseases to weaken civilizations before moving in with humanitarian aid that turns into permanent occupation. Dr. Martinez's voice carried barely controlled fury. The drought on Zerath Prime wasn't natural, Marcus. They caused it. The revelation hit both crews like a physical blow. The Keth Mori had spent months believing their world was suffering from climate change or cosmic bad luck, never imagining that their agony was deliberately inflicted for profit. The knowledge transformed their situation from desperate escape to something approaching a holy war. But it also created new urgency. If the hegemony was willing to destroy entire planets to create slaves, they would certainly have no qualms about eliminating two relatively small ships and their crews to protect their secrets. How long before those reinforcements arrive? Zephyr Tal asked Thano K, who was monitoring sensor feeds through the ship's internal systems. 6 hours, maybe less. The lead dreadnought is the World Breaker, Admiral Vextai commanding. She's even worse than Karath. The name was legend throughout the sector. Admiral Vextai had earned her reputation by literally destroying inhabited worlds that resisted hegemony expansion, turning their populations into asteroid fields and cautionary tales. If she was coming personally, it meant the hegemony considered this situation an existential threat. In a labor decks, word of the approaching fleet spread among the conscripts with electric intensity. But instead of despair, Zephyr Tal saw determination. These beings had already lost everything that mattered to them. The threat of death seemed almost trivial compared to the possibility of exposing the truth about their oppressors. Commander, the Altarian approached her with quiet urgency. There's something else you need to know. The neural collar system isn't just for control. It's also a monitoring network. The hegemony has been studying our species' biological responses, mapping our psychological profiles, recording everything. The implications were staggering. The hegemony wasn't just enslaving individuals. They were conducting massive biological and psychological experiments on entire species, gathering data that could be used for even more devastating attacks in the future. They're building a database, Healer Yathnam realized with horror. Biological weapons, psychological warfare techniques, targeted diseases. They could potentially eliminate any species that resists them. But Vasera had identified a potential opportunity in the crisis. If those collars are recording everything, they're also storing everything. All that data, all those records, they're all connected to the ship's central computer. Thano K caught on immediately. If we could access the collective data from all the hegemony ships, not just this one, we'd have documentation of crimes spanning decades, Zephyr Tal finished. Evidence that could bring down their entire operation. The plan that emerged from their desperate brainstorming was ambitious beyond reason. They would use the ship's own surveillance network against itself, turning the neural collar system into a massive data transmission array. Every piece of evidence, every record of atrocity, every detail of the hegemony's operations will be broadcast simultaneously to every major government and news service in the sector. But first, they had to take control of the ship. The uprising began at 1423 ship time, coordinated through a network of subtle signals that the conscripts had developed over months of oppression. In engineering, a group of Zephyrian technicians overloaded the power distribution systems, creating cascading failures throughout the ship's defensive grids. In the armory, former soldiers used their intimate knowledge of hegemony weapons to turn the ship's own arsenal against its crew. The overseer's control room fell within the first 10 minutes. The guards, overwhelmed by conscripts who had spent years memorizing their patrol routes and security procedures. As the neural collars deactivated throughout the labor decks, 500 voices rose in defiance, speaking in 40 languages, but united in their purpose. Admiral Karatha's response was swift and vicious. Security teams poured into the lower decks with orders to kill everyone they encountered. But they discovered what human and Kethmori forces had already learned. Desperation combined with intelligence created a formidable opponent. The ship's corridors became a maze of improvised defenses and guerrilla warfare. Conscripts used their intimate knowledge of the vessel's layout to appear and disappear like ghosts, striking at security teams and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Former engineers turned the ship's own systems into weapons, while ex-soldiers trained civilians in combat techniques learned through bitter experience. Meanwhile, Marcus and Dr. Martinez had reached the ship's central computer core, the massive quantum processing center that controlled everything from life support to weapons targeting. The security around it was formidable, but humans had proven remarkably adept at finding ways through apparently impregnable defenses. The transmission array is ready, Dr. Martinez reported as she interfaced with alien technology using improvised adapters. But we'll need massive computational power to broadcast to multiple star systems simultaneously. Marcus studied the quantum processing matrix, his mind calculating possibilities and consequences. What if we use the ship's own tactical computers? They're designed to coordinate fleet operations across interstellar distances. That would mean shutting down defensive systems, navigation, even life support in some sections, Dr. Martinez warned. Do it. The moment the transmission began, the Bloodfang became the galaxy's most powerful broadcasting station. Terabytes of data streamed out in all directions, carrying detailed records of the hegemony's crimes to every listening post, every communication relay, every government archive within 50 light-years. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Communication channels lit up with incoming messages as governments, news services, and private organizations received documentation of atrocities they had only suspected. The evidence was undeniable, comprehensive, and absolutely damning. But Admiral Karath wasn't finished. Override all safety protocols. His voice echoed through the ship's command structure. Prepare to scuttle the vessel. If we can't control the situation, we ensure no one survives to celebrate their victory. The ship's self-destruct sequence began with ominous mechanical sounds echoing through every deck. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in crimson as automated systems began venting atmosphere and initiating reactor shutdown procedures. How long? Zephyr Tal asked Thanoke, who was frantically trying to access the ship's safety systems. 30 minutes until reactor detonation, he replied grimly. The sequence is locked out, requires command-level authorization to abort. But the conscripts had one final card to play. Among their number was someone who had been deliberately overlooked by their captors, someone whose species appeared primitive, but possessed capabilities that the hegemony had never understood. The being introduced himself simply as Chorus, a representative of a species known for their apparent lack of advanced technology. What the hegemony hadn't realized was that his people were natural technopaths, capable of interfacing directly with computer systems through biological processes that were invisible to conventional scanning. I can reach the command authorization codes, Chorus said, his large, multifaceted eyes reflecting the emergency lighting. But I'll need to connect directly to the ship's central processor. The process was unlike anything Zephyr Tal had witnessed. Chorus placed his hands directly on the quantum processing matrix, his biological neural network somehow linking with the ship's electronic systems. Data flowed between organic and artificial minds in patterns that seemed to bypass every security protocol the hegemony had designed. Found them, Chorus whispered, sweat beading on his alien features despite the cooling atmosphere. But the Admiral has a backup plan. He's trying to trigger a reactor cascade that will destroy not just the ship, but anything within 10,000 kilometers. The reinforcement fleet was still hours away, but their own ship was within that blast radius, along with any escape pods or shuttles. Karath was willing to commit suicide to prevent the evidence from leaving the system. Can you stop it? Marcus asked from the computer core, his hands working frantically to maintain the data transmission. Maybe, Chorus replied. But I'll need to maintain contact with the system throughout the shutdown sequence. If I'm interrupted, if I lose concentration for even a moment, the implication was clear. Chorus would have to remain aboard the ship while everyone else evacuated, ensuring the reactor shutdown completed properly. It was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. But as Zephyr Tal looked around at the faces of the conscripts, she saw something remarkable. Without discussion, without formal decision-making, they had all reached the same conclusion. They would stay. Commander, the young Zephyrian said quietly, we've been dead for years. This is the first time we've had the chance to die for something meaningful. The next 20 minutes were the longest in Zephyr Tal's life. While Chorus maintained his connection to the ship's systems, fighting a digital battle against Admiral Karath's override attempts, the combined human Kethmori crew worked to ensure the data transmission continued. Every second meant more evidence reaching its destination, more governments learning the truth, more pressure building on the hegemony's network of supporters and collaborators. But it also meant more danger as the ship's systems began failing around them. Hull breaches opened to space as atmospheric controls collapsed. Emergency bulkheads sealed randomly as safety systems malfunctioned. The ship was literally falling apart around them. Transmission complete, Dr. Martinez announced with grim satisfaction. Every major government in the sector now has complete documentation of hegemony operations. Good, Chorus whispered, his connection to the ship's systems deepening. Because this is as far as I go. The reactor shutdown sequence completed with seconds to spare, the massive energy core slowly cycling down from critical to stable. But the effort had cost Chorus everything. His biological neural network, strained beyond its limits by the interface with alien technology, had suffered irreparable damage. As his life signs faded, the other conscripts gathered around him, representing dozens of species, but united in their respect for his sacrifice. He had given them all the gift of meaning, the knowledge that their suffering had finally served a purpose. Did we win? He asked weakly. Look at the communication feeds, Zephyr Tal said gently, showing him the flood of incoming messages on her scanner. The galaxy knows the truth now, and they're angry. Chorus smiled, a strangely peaceful expression on his alien features. Good. Anger is useful. Anger changes things. He died surrounded by friends he had never expected to have, knowing that his death had meaning beyond mere survival. But outside the ship, sensors were detecting new arrivals in the system. The hegemony reinforcements had arrived early, led by the notorious Worldbreaker. The real battle was about to begin. Admiral Vextai's flagship, the Worldbreaker, emerged from hyperspace like a metal leviathan, its massive hull bristling with enough firepower to reduce planets to rubble. Behind it came the full might of Hegemony Battle Group Delta 7, 2 additional dreadnoughts, 8 heavy cruisers, 24 destroyers, and a swarm of fighters that darkened space with their numbers. Aboard the captured Bloodfang, Commander Zephyr Tal watched the tactical display with grim fascination. In her entire military career, she had never faced odds this overwhelming. The enemy fleet represented more firepower than most planetary defense forces could muster. Incoming transmission, Vasera reported from the communication station. Admiral Vextai wants to speak directly with whoever's in command. The view screen activated to reveal a being that seemed carved from nightmares. Admiral Vextai's species was silicon-based, her crystalline features reflecting light in sharp, angular patterns that hurt to look at directly. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed designed to induce terror. I am Admiral Vextai of the Hegemony Third Fleet. You are aboard stolen Hegemony property, in possession of classified Hegemony information, and have committed acts of terrorism against lawful Hegemony operations. Surrender immediately, and your deaths will be quick. Marcus stepped into view beside Zephyr Tal, his human features calm despite their desperate situation. I'm Captain Marcus Chun of the Terran Colonial Fleet. We're not terrorists, Admiral. We're witnesses. Witnesses to what? To the systematic enslavement, torture, and genocide that your organization calls policy. Marcus gestured to the liberated conscripts standing behind him. These beings represent 43 species from 37 star systems. Every one of them was kidnapped, enslaved, and brutalized by hegemony forces. Admiral Vextai's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. Conscription for the greater good of galactic stability. All completely legal under hegemony law. Funny thing about laws, Dr. Martinez said as she joined the conversation. They only matter if people recognize their legitimacy. And right now, every major government in the sector is receiving documentation that proves the hegemony has been committing crimes against sentience on an unprecedented scale. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across the Admiral's features. What documentation? Thane activated a secondary display showing the flood of communication traffic their data transmission had generated. Government emergency sessions were being called, news services were breaking the story across hundreds of worlds, and military forces were beginning to mobilize in response to the revelations. Your organizational structure, your financial networks, your collaborators in legitimate governments, your biological weapons research, your deliberate environmental sabotage operations, Marcus listed methodically. Everything. The galaxy knows what you really are now. Admiral Vextai's response was predictable in its brutality. Then, they all die with you. The Worldbreaker's main guns began charging, their energy signatures visible on sensors as massive spikes of destructive potential. But, before she could give the firing order, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Additional ships entering the system, Vossera announced with barely contained excitement. Multiple vectors, different fleet configurations. It's a coalition force. The first to arrive were the ships of the Altarian Defense Fleet, sleek vessels commanded by Admiral Threnvar, whose daughter had been among the conscripts liberated from the Bloodfawn. Behind them came Zephyrian fast attack squadrons, their crews eager to avenge the destruction of their colony worlds. But those were just the beginning. Within hours, the system filled with warships representing dozens of species and governments. The revelations contained in the hegemony files had triggered the largest military coalition in galactic history, united by shared outrage at the scope of the crimes they had discovered. The Kethmori Expeditionary Fleet arrived under Commander Zethmar, Zephytal's former mentor, bringing waterships that had been converted into mobile hospitals. The human colonial navy sent the heavy cruiser Determination, commanded by Captain Sarah Kim, who had been specifically briefed on Marcus Chen's mission. Most surprisingly, several hegemony ships had broken formation and were requesting permission to defect, their crews having been exposed to the same evidence that had horrified the rest of the galaxy. "This is Admiral Threnvar of the Coalition Forces," came a transmission to all ships in the system. By unanimous vote of the assembled governments, the hegemony is declared a criminal organization. All hegemony vessels will surrender immediately or be destroyed. Admiral Vextai's response was to open fire. The battle that followed became legendary in military academies throughout the galaxy. The hegemony forces, despite being outnumbered, fought with the desperate ferocity of beings who knew their cause was lost but were determined to inflict maximum damage before their defeat. The Worldbreaker's guns could shatter smaller ships with single shots, and Admiral Vextai's tactical expertise had been honed through decades of conquest. But she was facing something unprecedented, an enemy that fought not for territory or resources, but for justice. The coalition forces coordinated with precision born of shared purpose. Altarian ships used their superior speed to harass the hegemony flanks, while Zephyrian squadrons conducted devastating bombing runs on the larger vessels. Human ships demonstrated their species' famous tactical flexibility, adapting their formations in real time to exploit weaknesses in hegemony defenses. But it was the liberated conscripts who provided the decisive advantage. Working from the captured Bloodfawn, the former slaves used their intimate knowledge of hegemony systems to feed intelligence to the coalition fleet. They knew every ship's weaknesses, every tactical doctrine, every command protocol their former captors would use. The Ravager's shield generators are located on Deck 7, Section 12, the young Zephyrian reported to Admiral Threnvar. Minimum armor protection, maximum vulnerability to plasma bombardment. Confirmed kill on the Ravager. Came to response minutes later. Target down. One by one, the hegemony ships fell. Their advanced technology and superior firepower couldn't compensate for fighting an enemy that knew their every secret. The coalition forces pressed their advantage relentlessly, driven by the knowledge that they were fighting to prevent future atrocities on an unimaginable scale. Admiral Vextai made her last stand aboard the Worldbreaker, using the massive dreadnought's firepower to hold off 3 coalition fleets while her remaining ships attempted to escape to hyperspace. But her tactical genius couldn't overcome the fundamental reality of her situation. She was defending the indefensible. "Admiral," her tactical officer reported with barely concealed panic, "we're detecting massive energy buildups throughout coalition space. Every major military in the sector is mobilizing. Intelligence estimates over 10,000 ships will be hunting us within the week." The scope of the response was unprecedented in galactic history. The evidence from the Bloodfawn had revealed crimes so extensive that every civilized species felt personally threatened. The hegemony had become the enemy of literally everyone. Final transmission from Admiral Vextai. Vossera announced aboard the Bloodfawn. The Admiral's image appeared on screen one last time, her crystalline features now fractured by stress cracks. "You think you've won something," she said, her harmonic voice distorted by static. "You think exposing our operations will somehow make the galaxy a better place." Marcus stepped forward to respond. "We think the galaxy deserves to know the truth about who you really are." What happens next is up to them. The truth. Admiral Vextai's laugh was like breaking glass. The truth is that every species in this galaxy would do exactly what we did if they had the power. The only difference between the hegemony and your precious coalition is opportunity. You're wrong, Zephyr said quietly. The difference between us is that when we found a stranger dying of thirst, we shared our water. When you found strangers in need, you enslaved them. The World Breaker's destruction lit up space like a miniature star, taking Admiral Vextai and her dreams of conquest with it. The few remaining hegemony ships surrendered or fled, their organization shattered beyond repair. But the real victory wasn't military. Within days, the coalition governments began implementing massive humanitarian operations. Refugee planets were established for displaced populations. Medical fleets provided aid to devastated worlds, and engineering corps began the process of reversing the environmental damage the hegemony had inflicted. The water-rich world of Kepler 442c became the first of many joint colony operations, with humans and Kethmori working together to establish sustainable extraction facilities that would benefit dozens of species. The technology-sharing agreements that followed revolutionized terraforming and environmental restoration throughout the sector. Most importantly, the liberation of the hegemony's forced labor camps revealed millions of individuals who had been given up for dead by their home civilizations. The reunification efforts that followed created bonds between species that had never previously cooperated. 6 months later, Commander Zephyr stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Freedom Station, watching supply ships deliver fresh water to Zerath Prime. The drought that had threatened her people with extinction was ending, not through conquest or exploitation, but through cooperation and shared technology. Marcus Chun had returned to human space, but not before establishing permanent diplomatic and cultural exchange programs between their peoples. Dr. Martinez had accepted a position heading the new Interspecies Medical Research Institute, dedicated to healing the damage done by hegemony biological experiments. The former conscripts had scattered to rebuild their lives, but many had chosen to remain together, forming the core of a new peacekeeping organization dedicated to preventing future atrocities. They called themselves the Witnesses, and their motto was simple: never again. As Zephyr watched the stars, she reflected on the strange chain of events that had brought them to this point. A simple act of kindness, sharing water with a stranded stranger, had somehow rippled outward to topple one of the galaxy's most powerful criminal organizations and create unprecedented cooperation between dozens of species. "Commander," came a familiar voice behind her. Captain Marcus Chun had returned for the station's dedication ceremony, wearing the dress uniform of the newly formed Coalition Defense Force. "Captain," she replied with genuine warmth. "How does it feel to be a hero of galactic liberation?" Marcus smiled, the expression that had once seemed alien, now comfortingly familiar. "Honestly, it feels like the beginning of something much bigger than any of us imagined." He was right. The coalition that had formed to stop the hegemony was evolving into something unprecedented, a true galactic community based on mutual aid rather than mutual exploitation. Trade agreements were being replaced by resource-sharing compacts. Military alliances were becoming cultural exchange programs. And at the center of it all was the simple principle that had started everything. When someone needs water, you share your water. "There's something I want to show you," Marcus said, leading her to a new section of the station. "A gift from my government to commemorate our alliance." The chamber he showed her contained a fountain, its crystalline structure designed to showcase the play of water in zero gravity. But the water itself was special. It came from 43 different worlds, representing every species that had been liberated from hegemony slavery. Water from every world touched by this conflict, Marcus explained. Mixed together, flowing as one. A reminder that no matter how different we all share the same basic needs. Zephyr watched the mingled waters dance in the station's artificial gravity, each drop carrying the hopes and memories of entire civilizations. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was symbolic of what they had all achieved together. The galaxy would never be the same. Where there had been fear and exploitation, there was now cooperation and hope. Where there had been the rule of the strongest, there was now the rule of law and justice. And it had all started with a simple human truth. Kindness repaid becomes friendship, and friendship can change the universe. As she watched the water flow, Zephyr smiled, knowing that somewhere among the stars, former slaves were building new lives, former enemies were becoming allies, and the dream of a truly civilized galaxy was finally becoming reality. The hegemony had tried to control the galaxy through fear. But humans and Kethmori had proven something far more powerful. Hope was contagious, justice was unstoppable, and sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could topple the mightiest empires. In the end, that was humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. Not their technology or their fighting spirit, but their unwavering belief that everyone deserved the chance to be free, that every life had value, and that the measure of a civilization wasn't its power, but its compassion. The water continued to flow, carrying those truths to every corner of the station and through the broadcasts and communications that reached out from Freedom Station to every corner of the galaxy itself.